Sakamoto Days is a battle shonen focusing on the world of assassins, and specifically this world's greatest assassin, Taro Sakamoto, one of the most badass and physically skilled characters in ongoing manga. And because of this, I decided to throw this seasoned assassin into the world of Jujutsu Kaisen in order to see just how successful he'd really be when his targets aren't bound by the limits of nature. Toji Fushiguro showed us that with a little bit of planning and elbow grease, even the world's strongest can be brought to the brink. And today, me and No Operator will be seeing if Taro Sakamoto can do the same thing himself. So just to jump right into it, we'll start with like the lowest level of JJK character that you can really discuss in the context of a fight in op, and that's just a grade 4 level character. For all those watching, you can essentially just think of this as the weakest of the weak. Characters that have little to no combat ability, they just don't got hands. They don't have a great curse technique or a lot of cursed energy. And Noab, just to jump into it, how do you think Sakamoto goes up against some of the weakest JJK characters that we got to offer here?
So obviously when it comes to Sakamoto, the man is an absolute trained assassin who is prepared to deal with almost any and all situations he faces. If we're placing Sakamoto into a world where he's completely out of his element, he's a character based off of being someone that literally kills people for a living, is prideful of his ability to adapt. And Sakamoto specifically, which we can get into later. But in regards to some of the weakest ideas of a Jujutsu Kaisen character I can think of, when you think of like fly heads or people like the Nita siblings who basically don't even really have a curse technique, I mean, Sakamoto is going to be able to literally clear through any kind of weak character like that. When we're talking a character that was the top echelon of assassin in his verse, we're going to have to give it a little bit more characters that have curse techniques or characters that are going to be able to make it a little bit more complicated for Sakamoto and to think on his feet in regards to a character that can literally take someone out with a bag of potato chips and a half off sticker.
Yeah, I mean, when we're talking about the weakest of the weak characters, like Noab said, you're talking about like flyhead curse spirits that aren't even deemed a threat to normal humans. You're talking about basically regular people with a modicum of cursed energy to amp their physical stats, and you're comparing that to someone like Sakamoto, who is consistently reacting to and blitzing literal gunfire. He's getting hit with like crazy explosions. He's stopping buses with a stop sign. He's doing all kinds of crazy stuff, right? Sakamoto Days, very like surprisingly strong verse, very like a low-key strong series, and you'll notice that when we're talking about physical stats and comparing it to characters like this. So when it comes to grade 4, when we're talking about the weakest of the weak, the lowest of the low, Sakamoto is absolutely clearing, and that sentiment will kind of be the same going into grade 3, where we're talking about characters that are definitely competent sorcerers in their own right. They're definitely characters that are relatively strong and have some okay showings. You can think of like Mai Zenin, for example, who is by no means strong in the overall context of JJK, but isn't quite a straight up non-combatant. Now, as I already mentioned, Sakamoto, even way outside of his prime, is able to very obviously and easily react to gunfire on numerous occasions. I mean, we see him like point blank spitting out a piece of gum to alter the trajectory of a bullet shot at him, and he's doing this super casually. So Mai with her little 6-shooter, even with that, surprise 7th bullet, really isn't going to be doing much. And I think I really want to make it clear the level of character we're talking about here. It's kind of well known, at least amongst people that dabble in power scaling, that JJK is a pretty slow verse, especially when being lowballed. Sakamoto doesn't necessarily have this problem. I mean, from chapter 1, he's reacting to bullets, explosion, things of that matter are really no issue for him. So you have Taro Sakamoto step up to the JJK verse, and Mai pulls out the 6-shooter. I think we're okay. I think we're all right. I'm not gonna lie to you.
You pretty much hit the nail on the head there, and that's even when we get into characters that are going to be able to add some sort of trickery into their arsenal. When you consider grade 3s like Mai Zenin are able to add that 7th bullet into their gun when they're firing, or characters like Nobara, obviously a much more dynamic character of the grade 3 level when you consider her resonance technique, hairpin, the straw doll technique as a whole is definitely adding a lot of things that Sakamoto Sakamoto, one, has probably never even dealt with in his everyday life, and two, are definitely, when you consider someone at least like Nobara, if they're able to actually get one over on him, let's say Nobara, while she's getting the brakes beaten off of her, is able to grab a strand of hair from Sakamoto, nail that into it, and actually hit him with a hairpin from afar. If that strikes his heart, I mean, Sakamoto is, at the end of the day, an average human man. I mean, average is used very loosely there, but still, like, Nobara does have the ability to kill someone like Sakamoto with these extra added feats. The problem goes into exactly what Ronan just said before. Sakamoto is a character who is not only an assassin that is able to react to bullets, as Ronan said. We do see him handle different things like getting thrown through walls, running through an entire train and jumping into the next train that's going in the entirely different direction. His speed is something that not even really some of the top tier echelons are going to be even used to handling. So when you consider characters in the grade 3 level are going to be at that much of a disadvantage in regards to just straight up hand throwing, and the fact that someone like Sakamoto is so well known for using his environment, even as we get into grade 2s, we'll see that Sakamoto's use of the environment is really a curse technique in and of itself. It might as well be classified in their universe.
Now, moving into the grade 2 level of sorcerer, I think this is where we start getting interesting discussions, because while there is certainly still quite a physical gap for most characters here, you start getting into like a little bit of interesting types of sorcerers or types of characters. This is where you get the Kamos or the Inumakis or the Mekamarus, the Inos, the Pandas, and so on and so forth. This is where you're starting to get to that level of character that, while they aren't just running up to Sakamoto and swapping hands with him, far from it, in fact, they do have abilities that are particularly interesting, like Kamo's blood manipulation, for example, or one that I think Sakamoto could find pretty troublesome, especially with no prior knowledge, is like Inumaki and his cursed speech. And that's just for the simple reason that he has no defense to it. He has no sort of defense from these types of abilities. Piercing blood, for example, is just going to be a very similar sort of thing to a bullet and a projectile of that nature. He can also use it to bind him with blood. We've seen Kamo do that against Niue in the Goodwill event, and we've even seen him change the trajectory of some of his projectiles, and that could potentially catch someone like Sakamoto off guard, considering his lack of knowledge on specific sorcery of this nature. And I mean, Noah, is there any real way that you think Sakamoto in particular would have a counter to cursed speech? Because the only one I can think of is just blitzing Inumaki before he even gets a word off, which is certainly possible, but I don't know if that's necessarily how he's approaching every single battle, especially considering that for the most part up to this point, he would be getting through here with like pretty smooth sailing.
Yeah, because one of the toughest things that Sakamoto is going to run into, especially as, like you said, we get into some of these more troublesome curse techniques, is going to be the complete lack of cursed energy. Now, we know with certain characters that is an absolute advantage when it comes to fighting. I don't know if we could classify Sakamoto's insane stat potential and just feats in his own series as heavenly restriction-esque in Jujutsu Kaisen, but either way, even cursed speech against Maki and Toji is quite contested amongst the community. So I definitely feel like it's something that would work against Sakamoto, definitely present him with a lot of trouble if he gets hit with it. Like you said, he does have the probability of completely ending Inumaki if he notices him as a threat before the curse speech happens, because again, if Inumaki doesn't throw a killing blow in Sakamoto's direction, who's to say how long it would take for Sakamoto to break out of the curse speech and then kill Inumaki? I guess it really depends on who gets the first strike first. And it really shows that even as we get into grade 2, obviously we'll talk about grade 1s and maybe even past that in this video, one of the most detrimental things to Sakamoto is going to be these curse techniques that are going to be able to trip him up entirely. Because if you want to consider characters like Ino or Panda, for example, characters whose curse techniques are only really an amplification or additional power into their already existing hand-to-hand arsenal. For example, Ino, despite having the 4 auspicious beasts, you know, a lot of the different things that he can do are just a horn drill that is heat-seeking and a little bit of water that adds a little bit more fluid motion to his strikes and combat. If the grandson of the curse user, using a little bit of Toji's genes, is able to pick that horn drill out of the sky, I definitely feel like Sakamoto is going to be able to do the same thing, and it's going to be one of the biggest mistakes that Ino made, giving Sakamoto a weapon. He would much rather prefer Sakamoto to be bare hands, because he might have a better chance of getting out of that beatdown than he did with Toji Toji before. The point of this rant that I'm getting into here is that characters with more basic curse techniques like this are going to have the biggest issues because they're not going to be able to handle just a physical menace like Sakamoto. Same, they wouldn't really be able to handle a character like Toji. However, when you consider curse speech is a little bit more tactical, a little bit more metaphysical, that's where Sakamoto is going to really have the biggest problem in Jujutsu Kaisen.
Yeah, and I mean, we've even seen characters that have more supernatural abilities that are physically weak. They're able to sort of have some level of success there. Shin, for example, is someone that benefits from being able to read minds. Despite not being nearly in the same ballpark as many of the assassins that he goes up against, through Shin's like precognition, he's able to like overcome certain abilities. And that's because generally speaking, Sakamoto Days characters are regular humans, quote unquote, in the most like loosest of sense. Like they don't have extra sensory abilities. They can't fly or do anything of that sort. They're typically just superhuman in terms of normal human capabilities. They're like expert marksmen to a ridiculous degree, or they're super fast or super strong, or like ridiculously skilled in some specific form or fashion. But even someone like super weak like Inumaki, as we've continuously mentioned before, probably can in certain scenarios get a win off on Sakamoto purely because his ability is particularly unique and something that would catch him off guard. If he picks a really bad word like stop or halt or like blow away, right? I think that would certainly be a mistake. But if he does just pick sleep, Sakamoto really can't do anything in regards to that, right? He has no cursed energy defenses to something like that. And in the weirdest of ways, I think Inumaki is probably the first character that even potentially has a win con. To contrast this, as Noab said, the more simplistic your abilities are, the more reliant they are on physical strikes or speed or reactionary abilities, the less likely you are to defeat him, plain and simple, right? Take pre-awakened Maki, for example. In terms of physical ability, out of all of the grade 2s we mentioned, she probably is one of, if not the most physically dominant, being able to also react to gunfire, albeit with a little bit of more effort than Sakamoto seems to. And that's like a pretty good feat for her in terms of strength. She's, you know, pretty solid. She kind of clowns on Mai in a very similar fashion how we said Sakamoto would. But you make these two characters go up against one another, and I'm sorry, but Maki, you're getting folded. You're getting done about just as bad as Jogo did you in Shibuya. Sakamoto, when it comes to skill, when it comes to hand-to-hand combat, when it comes to weapon mastery, I mean, they're just, I'm gonna like call a spade and maybe tip my hand for how I feel about certain character fights moving forward. But there is not a character that I would say in terms of skill outclasses Sakamoto or outclasses many Sakamoto Days characters in general. They just prioritize significantly different things. So Maki coming at him with his staff, yeah, that's probably Sakamoto's staff in 0.2 seconds. Like she's getting that taken from her. She's getting cooked in physical combat. And that's something that you're gonna notice is kind of a commonality. The more complex the technique, the more difficult it is to perceive or decipher, probably the better chance you have against someone like Sakamoto, and the more likely you are to be able to, you know, pull the wool over his eyes. And we kind of see that a lot with grade 1 sorcerers. And Noam, you can kind of just jump into that, or, you know, how you think like certain characters or this level of power goes up against someone like Sakamoto.
Yeah, I mean, you will literally see this trend carry in when we get into grade 1s. Of course, as Ronan just mentioned, grade 1s are the ones that are going to have a little bit more uniqueness to their technique, which thank God, because when you consider the difference between how a character like Nanami would perform against Sakamoto compared to a character like Todo, it's really night and day. Two characters who I know Ronan has talked about before, I'm not sure what he really thinks, but two characters that I think, at least physically, are probably somewhere similar relative. Whereas Nanami with his critical hit, if he actually lands a hit, sure, you could take Sakamoto's arms off, but who's to say he's actually going to land that hit against Sakamoto? Whereas a character like Todo with something like Boogie Woogie, who's able to clap his hands and switch with anything that has cursed energy already, or he's able to imbue with cursed energy, which is one of the masterful ways of using Boogie Woogie that we've seen Todo use plenty of times over, being able to use from what the anime shows as a coat hanger to Yuji throws a rock imbued with cursed energy for Todo to switch between, and Todo being a very great and excellent sorcerer when it comes to his curse technique is going to be able to utilize Boogie Woogie to a decent degree against someone like Sakamoto. However, it really comes down to, as Ronan mentioned before, a lot of these Jujutsu Kaisen characters are just going to be lacking in the the physical stat department, which is why it's that complicated curse technique that's going to make all the difference.
Yeah, so like you said, Noah, I think Nanami, just because he purely relies on a very straightforward strategy, is getting pieced up, right? He's not landing that critical 7-3 strike. I'm just going to call a spade a spade. I think he's too straightforward and doesn't display enough quality martial arts skill, weapon mastery, anything of the sort to really lead me to believe that he's landing those strikes that is going to be like just tearing through Sakamoto in the way that he would need to in order to get a win. One thing that also I should probably address, simply because I think a lot of people will mention, because we've been talking about speed, we haven't really mentioned like Sakamoto's like striking power. And obviously you have feats where he's like stopping a bus, barreling down the road in its tracks like it's nothing, right? He just casually is doing this. And then you have characters like Yuji who, you know, they're seen as extremely impressive for being able to pick up a car and chuck it across the street, right? Whereas Sakamoto, where he's like canonically at 30% of his like old self's potential, is able to do something like this with pretty moderate difficulty at best. Even just talking about straight up confrontation, Sakamoto's gonna hit like a freight train. But one thing that's also the case with JJK characters that you have to remember is that they're only superhuman when cursed energy is applied to specific parts of their body. It's why someone like Toji uses conventional weaponry against sorcerers, and it's also why Kenjaku sort of says that conventional weapons are good to use against sorcerers, even though relative to top tiers, they aren't the fastest or most potent abilities. And it's because they can typically catch a sorcerer off guard who is sensing for cursed energy, and it allows them to basically get hit without properly defending themselves with their power. Prime example of a really durable character actually falling prey to this is Yuji. Yuji is actually one of the rare JJK characters who has superhuman durability without the use of cursed energy. Even he is stated to be like damaged by an attack that he shouldn't have if he protected properly with cursed energy. In the bathroom portion of the fight versus Choso, it's made rather clear that blood meteorite that pierces his liver and nearly kills him would not have done the trick if Yuji knew that it was coming and properly defended with cursed energy. So if you have someone like Sakamoto who's like clearly outspeeding these level of characters, you have him grab his, you know, his trusty pen and he's just cooking. Even if these characters would normally have the durability to survive these attacks, like they're just getting like blitzed and punctured and beaten up before they can even properly defend themselves with cursed energy. Now, like Noab said, Boogie Woogie is one of those abilities that is very interesting to see in combat, and against most characters, against a very unskilled opponent or one that's just not used to the technique, I would argue that it probably would be enough to allow like someone as physically dominant as Todo to get in a few key hits to maybe slow Sakamoto down. But unfortunately, we've seen like some pretty good examples of Sakamoto adapting to things like this. When him and Shin are going up against Horiguchi, like he swaps their neurons so they start like attacking people that they don't mean to. Sakamoto, within the span of like 2 chapters, is able to adapt to this and start fighting and swapping his targets within the span of like milliseconds. It's actually kind of ridiculous how quickly him and Shin are able to adapt to this. And once again, this scientist is affecting like their actual brain waves and affecting the way that they like are able to perceive and attack one another. So for someone like Todo and Boogie Woogie, I definitely think it would catch him off guard at first, but you're talking about the most skilled assassin in the world. If anyone can adapt to this on the fly, I think it's Taro Sakamoto.
Yeah, Sakamoto, as stated before, is just an assassin who has seen so much in his everyday life. I feel like the scientist example that you just gave is one of the prime reasons why Sakamoto wouldn't be able to be stopped unless the technique was also adding a little bit more lethality to it besides just Boogie Woogie. For example, you have a character like Mei Mei who, granted physical stats, yada yada, that we just talked about, one of the most important things that Mei Mei has at her disposal was going to be Bird Strike, which we know is going to be a very damaging technique. When you add something like that into the fray, I guess one of the biggest questions that we're going to have to answer here is going to be what exactly is Sakamoto's durability if he actually does get hit with one of these things. Obviously, it's going to be very hard and easier said than done to actually land a critical hit like Bird Strike onto a character like Sakamoto. So again, that's a whole nother argument, but the durability question does get brought up again when you consider there are also other grade ones with added intensive speed also have the ability to freeze Sakamoto wherever he is if he isn't able to pick up on their curse technique in the proper way. Characters like Naobito Zenin with projection sorcery. If you have a character like Naobito, who was stated to be second in speed to Satoru Gojo alone, if not, he would have been the fastest sorcerer in the entire verse. Whether you want to say where their speed stats come to and where it calculates, that's beside the point. Ultimately, when you have a technique like projection sorcery, that's going to be able to let a character like Naobito land some pretty critical hits, and multiple of them, because it took a half awakened Maki with her extra sensory, or at least half awakened extra sensory, to discover the 24 frames idea and actually set up a perfect hit to defeat Naoya, the other user of projection sorcery. If Sakamoto is able to actually even figure out a way around such a curse technique, would he be able to survive enough hits to even make that possible?
Yeah, techniques like that are pretty tricky because they rely on you even knowing that there's a trick in the first place. I mean, you even have characters that are relatively experienced in the ways of sorcery, or at least understand that curse techniques and supernatural abilities are being used, like Maki and Nanami, sort of perceiving Naobito use this technique for the first time, and they're just like, I don't know what that is. Nanami obviously accurately guesses that it's a curse technique, but in Maki's case, she literally is just like, what was that? He just kind of appeared there from their perception. Now, Sakamoto obviously is going to like have way better kinetic vision and like reaction times than them, but the problem is going to be when he starts getting turned into frames and like attacked. Now, Naobito and Naoya aren't necessarily known for their overwhelming physical strength in the same way that someone like Nanami is, or even someone like Yuji, for example. However, those attacks will start to stack up, they will start to pile on, and they definitely could start to damage him. The only saving grace that I imagine he would have is that Naobito and Naoya, or just sorcerers in general in character, are willing to explain their technique in order to get an amp in potency. If you think that they do something like that specifically against Sakamoto, I could see that allowing him to understand the technique better and essentially have better counters for it, which is funny because the counter is just like move faster and hit harder. But I do think that characters like Naobito and Naoya definitely would be a little bit troublesome because their abilities, even for characters within the story, have a little bit of complexity to them that maybe some like quote unquote regular assassins within the Sakamoto Days universe don't quite have. Another example of this that I think we could jump into, or two examples of this, albeit on different ends of the spectrum, are like Megumi and Higuruma, two characters that their abilities are super complicated in the sense that they're hard to understand, but they add a level of, how should I say, unpredictability that Sakamoto may not be used to. Megumi, in the context of having all of his shadows, being able to spam Divine Dog for like overwhelming attack potency, Rapid Escape to cloud Sakamoto's judgment and his view, Nue to get away, electrocute and stun, Max Elephant to just douse the battlefield in water and, you know, obviously just land on top of him to weigh him down. And then he obviously, I think the thing that probably provides him the most variety here would be his open domain expansion, which would just like, I'm gonna be real, the opening of a domain might be a win con purely because Sakamoto can't put cursed energy on his feet to step on it. I mean, we see Megumi in his fight with Reggie. If Reggie does not apply cursed energy onto his feet intentionally, he'll just sink into it. And that's why later in the battle, he actually does when he gets like body slammed in there by Max Elephant. So if Sakamoto does not get out of that range very quickly, I could see even something as simple as that, something where the counter is literally just basic cursed energy manipulation, catching him off guard, because while he's definitely going to town on Megumi in a physical confrontation, Megumi's also fought Toji, a character who would also go to town on him in a physical confrontation. He's not very new to the idea of a character outclassing him in terms of stats, and neither is someone like Higuruma.
Yeah, I think Megumi is going to be the first example we have of a character actually having almost as many options as Sakamoto almost always has, and in a given moment, simply because whereas Sakamoto, as we said before, relies primarily on his environment. Ronan made the joke about his handy dandy pen being a terrible murder weapon, which a character like Nanami, who has at least 10 different Shikigami to call upon, one including Maharaga, who is a whole nother discussion in and of itself, whether Sakamoto could fight Maharaga or not. But either way, having the lightning of Nue, having the defense and stealth and confusing nature of Rapid Escape, having the water from Max Elephant, all the different things that we talked about so far, and having them all all constantly be able to be thrown at Sakamoto in different ranges and effects. I mean, in the anime, we do see Toji at least be able to notice the lightning that's coming for him. So whether you want to argue or not that a character that has intense speed is going to be able to react to that lightning like Sakamoto, it still gives Megami a decent fighting chance and a much better opportunity of victory than pretty much almost any other character besides that. If Naobito is going to be able to get one over on Sakamoto with projection sorcery, I figure that Megami, including his domain expansion, you figure some of the other things that he can do, he can turn himself into shadow clones. If he gets hit by Sakamoto, he can just tank that hit completely, while two other Megami clones are jumping from behind him to hit him with curse tools. You've got infinite amount of Nues, Toad Shikigamis, and all the different things that can come in and help. As far as it goes, in my honest opinion, I really feel like when you have all of these different opportunities where, like we said before, Megami definitely falls short in the physical aspect, you can see where a lot of these additional aspects of the curse technique can help, especially when we get to a character like Higuruma, whose domain expansion is just going to be able to completely mollywop Sakamoto in the eyes of the law, in a sense, because with being a top tier hitman, there's no doubt in my mind there's going to be multiple different things that Higuruma is going to be able to get Sakamoto on. But whether you want to say confiscation is going to do anything to Sakamoto or give Higuruma the actual advantage in a fight with deadly sentencing and the executioner's blade is kind of an anomaly.
Yeah, it's tough because now that we have a little bit more information on Higuruma's specific abilities, whether or not he gets confiscation and the death penalty is just ambiguous. Now, he could get Sakamoto on like many of his extensive assassination escapades, but he could also get him on something like, I don't know, destruction of property, which is something that Sakamoto does quite frequently, in fact. In the event that he only gets like confiscation, you can maybe say that he takes whatever weaponry Sakamoto has on his person at the time. And then at that point, it's just like, okay, Sakamoto without cursed energy or a weapon versus Higuruma. And I feel like we've done this song and dance before in this video, but Sakamoto is cooking him. Higuruma has a lot of potential as a sorcerer, as a close quarter combatant specifically. Not so much, right? Now, in the event that he gets something like the Executioner Sword and confiscation, so Sakamoto's losing whatever weapon he has, I think things become a little bit more interesting. The only issue I take with Higuruma getting like a clean win is that based on everything we know now, I'm assuming that all of the information about both the domain and the Executioner Sword is input directly into your brain, somewhat similar to how like Hakari's rules are input into your brain based on his own domain expansion. And if that's the case, now you have Sakamoto knowing that he can't let this blade cut him or else it's curtains for him. And I don't know if you agree, but maybe this is crazy. Like I could just be glazing right now. So let me know if I'm going too crazy, but I do genuinely think if Sakamoto realizes like, okay, I only have to avoid this sword slashing me, I really don't think it's all that crazy to say that he can still beat Higuruma. He just has to be like a lot more careful. I mean, this is the same guy that was kind of like fighting a cursed energyless Yuji. And, you know, even if you want to say he was somewhat being dominant, he wasn't necessarily overwhelming him in the same way that you'd expect someone like Sakamoto to in physical close quarters combat. So I'm kind of curious where you stand on that.
No, I would definitely agree with you in a sense that if it was just Higuruma and Sakamoto in a room together and it was Higuruma with the Executioner's blade and Sakamoto left to his vices, I definitely feel like Sakamoto would be able to come out in that victory, especially given the info dump that provides him the knowledge. He would just have to dodge the Executioner's blade and not get touched by it. He is a strong enough, agile enough, and intelligent enough fighter that he's going to be able to, at the very least, play keep away with Higuruma. Obviously, like you said, Higuruma went up against a cursed energyless Yuji and was able to at least keep up and push Yuji against the wall. And if we're going to say that Yuji is a very fast physical fighter, he's able to throw cars, he's at least somewhat going to be relative to Sakamoto's level, if you want to say maybe on certain aspects, maybe not every single one, but I feel like that's a really good way to weigh how Sakamoto would handle a character like Higuruma.
For sure. And speaking of Yuji, I mean, I guess we can get into, you know, punch kick man himself, right? Yuji Itadori. I think probably one of like just the best analogs for going back and forth physically with Sakamoto. And I will just say this, right? Recently, I've seen a lot of like Yuji's skill versus like other anime characters debate, one of the main ones being Naruto. And I'm not going to open that can of worms in this video. However, I will say this, and I'll say this confidently. Even if you assume that Sakamoto has like no physical, like statistical advantages over Yuji, which I just think is incorrect. But let's say that you were to assume they're relatively even in terms of speed, in terms of like strength, or even if Yuji has like the advantage in terms of straight up durability. Sakamoto is so much more resourceful and skilled, at least when we're going off of what is displayed. It's actually not even funny. The way this fight gets brought into like any random shop or mall or any place that has anything, he getting 2 half-off stickers on his eyes, getting wombo comboed into like just like an escalator. Sakamoto's taking like some random shit and just throwing it at Yuji at the speed of sound. I mean, it's actually kind of ridiculous how Sakamoto does him, especially if he goes into a skinny form and decides, all right, it's time to really lock in. Yuji's very strong, and I think his biggest advantage would be like his overwhelming durability and resilience, because unlike many characters who, if they're blitzed, their durability is basically normal human level, that's not really the case for Yuji. His basic durability is still really high, and I could see Sakamoto having to like genuinely wear him down. But I mean, you give this man an ounce of prep time, and by prep time, I literally mean, I don't know, give him a gun or something, which he's obviously an expert in using. He's showering him with bullets, then he's getting up close and scrapping with him, then he's like gaining distance when needed. I think Sakamoto is just someone that has too many options, even when going up against one of JJK's more gifted physical fighters.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we really do need to discuss and bring into the equation, is the fact that Sakamoto is, for all intents and purposes, also the #1 marksman or #1 weapons user, at least in most of the universe in that series. I mean, you could argue that there are some people that are better at using a sniper rifle than Sakamoto, but I think it's stated that Sakamoto does have an incredible usage when it comes to weaponry and everything of the sort. So a lot of the fights that Sakamoto is going to be involved in are also going to include potential gun usage even further than just the environment around him, especially if you consider that in this universe, Sakamoto may actually be allowed to get the kill, because in his own universe, Sakamoto is almost always holding back. Now, when it comes to just straight up throwing hands between the two of them, this is going to be Sakamoto's greatest challenge in regards to overall martial arts and close quarters, to the point where I think Yuji does have a little bit crazier feats in the sense of jumping from building to building and like leaving a giant crater in the building that he jumps from. Yuji's also a big user of the environment as well, but I think Ronan hit the nail on the head where Sakamoto is just, even if you want to say physically the two are comparable, you just can't say the expertise of using your environment around you are, because even though Yuji gets props in that department, Sakamoto is just the absolute king and will be able to use literally everything better than Yuji can.
And I think when you account for the fact that you have prime Sakamoto supposedly scaling over everyone in the story, including characters like Takamura, who just casually unsheath their sword, cutting like massive portions of building like it's nothing, and prime Sakamoto is supposed to be this godlike assassin who's still above that level, it's like, okay, yeah, you really have, you compare, Yuji's done some crazy stuff, right? Obviously so, but he's no slouch either. And one of the things that I think hasn't really been necessary so far, but I kind of want to just at least entertain the idea as a, as an alternative possibility as we go into it, as we go into this, like, I call it disaster class level tier, but you can really call it whatever you want. It's just the middle ground between grade 1 sorcerers, or like, your typical grade 1 sorcerer, take a Nanami, take a Todo, take a Naobito, and special grades, take your Sukunas and your Gojos. Because I do think that there's a pretty wide gulf where, you can take a Kashimo, or you could take a Hakari, or you could take, plenty of characters that I think are kind of in that in-between state. And Noah, how do you think Sakamoto does? Once again, just an alternative idea as we get into it. We'll talk about him both with and without this in his kit. But if he starts like picking up cursed tools during his tenure in JJK, right? He takes Nanami's blunted blade, for example, or God forbid he get like the inverted spear of heaven or soul split katana, right? Like as we get into characters that are obviously going to require a lot more from him, or even just outright defeat him, I'm very curious if we think that, maybe giving him the proper weaponry allows him to deal with these characters more efficiently. But kind of to just jump into it, for all those that don't know, I mean, we can appropriate for the name, talk about like how he fights against the disaster class level curses. Think Dagon, Hanami, Jogo, Mahito, etc. You can even add Shoso in there because I think he's like at least in a similar echelon of curse spirit level. I will say I think it's at this level with characters with domain expansions where I think Sakamoto just loses the ability to secure a victory outside of like hyper specific circumstances and context. Now, I hope this is obvious, right? But me and Noop are assuming that Sakamoto can see the curse spirits for the sake of making this an entertaining video or an entertaining matchup. If you want to say that he can't, then obviously he just gets like bodied by entities that he literally can't see. But I'm gonna go ahead and lend him some of those cursed energy seeing glasses. He wears them in canon anyways. I'm gonna just let him have that. And Noop, I think you'll agree, right? But even if you were to say he's more physically competent than a lot of the curse spirits on this list, I feel like a domain expansion is something that he's just not equipped to deal with in any capacity. There's no analog for that in his verse. And to be fair, there's not very many domain expansion like analogs for many characters in many different universes, anime, manga, or comic books alike.
So I think you hit the nail on the head here, where this is just going to be a class of character where Sakamoto, for lack of a better word, is just going to be overwhelmed. You can kind of already see how some of the initial domain expansions, even though they weren't necessarily violent or one-hit kills that we're going to be getting into, considering Megami's Chimera Shadow Garden and Higuruma's Deadly Sentencing are more amplifications of their initial powers. But we've seen characters like Dagon, characters like Hanami and Jogo be able to just completely change the landscape of the areas they're fighting in thanks to their cursed energy output, their ability to conjure their known elements such as fire, the forest, water, anything that they need at their disposal, not even including their domain expansions. Sakamoto is a very physical peak fighter in this verse. Do not get me wrong. If we're talking Sakamoto is throwing hands with Dagon, Hanami, he's probably going to do a pretty good job, if not be able to overwhelm them in that class of fighting. When it comes to Dagon completely filling an entire, Shibuya station with water, or Hanami creating an entire forest and being able to pop in and out of the different branches, throwing curse buds that are just going to be completely sucking the life out of Sakamoto, considering that if we're going by the rules of the universe that we're in, Sakamoto will have at least a small ounce of curse energy, which means that he's going to be knocked out pretty quickly by even small little attacks like that characters like Todo that we just said Sakamoto could beat would be able to handle too, just because they have a little bit more expertise in this verse. Jogo, I mean, what's going to stop this man from being melted into a crisp besides just playing keep away and running as fast as he can in the other direction? Let alone if, like Ronan kind of wanted me to discuss from the very beginning, and I completely avoided because it's just a sad fact of the day for Sakamoto, if he gets trapped inside of a barrier like Dagon's Hanami's, which was finally revealed to us, or Jogo's, unfortunately, I think a character like Sakamoto is just going to be cooked because there's no effing way he's going to be able to defend against one-hit kills like this.
Yeah, I mean, we saw how characters that are acquainted with domain expansions dealt with it. Like, Nani just told Maki, hey, we don't have a counter domain. We don't have an anti-domain technique. The only thing we can do is like just attack these things as soon as they hit you and try not to instantly die, right? Nanami lost his eye and took a pretty decent portion of damage when only 30% of Dagon's sure hit was aimed at him, right? 70% was aimed at Naobito, and he has an anti-domain technique, and he was still overwhelmed as soon as Dagon started adding his own physicality to the mix. You take someone like Maki, who was getting probably a fraction of a percent, someone who's also pretty physically gifted but is more in a position like Sakamoto would be, she's getting cooked, right? The only reason she probably doesn't die is because Dagon perceives her to be so weak and like he has literally bigger fish to fry. You're putting Sakamoto versus Dagon, Sakamoto versus Hanami, Sakamoto versus Jogo in a 1v1 situation where let's say Sakamoto just cooking them, right? Utterly eviscerating them. The problem is that they can heal, and the problem is that even after taking a lot of damage, every single one of these characters can open a domain expansion while on the brink of death. And as soon as he hears domain expansion, boom, he's being eaten by fish, or he's being burned alive, or God forbid you put him against Mahito and his soul gets transfigured, right? Like, Taro Sakamoto is elite, like Noab said, like we've been reiterating, but there are certain abilities that he just doesn't have a counter to, right? Certain techniques, even in terms of pure physicality, he's going up against someone like Mahito, no domain being open. Sakamoto might just run out of physical stamina before Mahito finally like runs out of cursed energy, because auto transfiguration is such a broken technique and it's a one-hit kill for someone like him who can't defend his soul with cursed energy in any capacity. I think it's once we get to this level that we see, things start getting really, really tough for Sakamoto, or downright impossible for him to win. And a large portion of that is just simply domain expansions are broken. Going into other characters though, maybe someone like Choso, I think is where we get that status quo reestablished, because piercing blood is a very kind of similar context in terms of speed for something like a bullet. So I don't think Sakamoto would be unable to dodge this attack or unable to avoid it. But even in a scenario where he doesn't have to worry about a domain expansion, Choso's blood is poisonous. He lets it hit him even one time and he's in deep, deep shit. It's once we get to this level of character that I think we start realizing that not only are they now physically incapable of getting like completely eviscerated, I still think Sakamoto has an advantage in a lot of these matchups, but not only are they now more physically relative, they have abilities or unique takes on sorcery that are able to genuinely cause him issue.
I think this is the truest sense of what we were kind of foreshadowing in the very beginning of the video, which was some of these characters just have techniques that are not just additional things to throw into their fighting style, but are just complete and utter dominations of their own in a sense, especially when you consider we have characters, as you mentioned, Mahito, who I think is the truest form of showing what a domain expansion, how it just completely overrides Sakamoto, despite of us just talking all of that. Like, you have a character like Higuruma, whose domain expansion, again, is just an addition, and because Sakamoto may be able to beat him in a fist fight, sure, he wins. You could argue he wins that fight. You could even argue if Sakamoto just plays keep away or never gets hit with Mahito's hands, as we've seen characters like Yuji or even Todo do in their own verse, sure, Sakamoto could win, but domain expansion always puts him in that place where he can't win. But even when you have characters who Ronan kind of alluded to, where you have their techniques are just so kind of insanely damaging, like someone like Kashimo, who even when you consider he might not even use his curse technique against someone like Sakamoto, being able to conjure the positive and negative curse energy in his area, and then after marking Sakamoto, which we know Kashimo's a great physical fighter, I don't think he'll have much trouble if he just even lands one solid contact on Sakamoto. Kashimo can just shoot his lightning bolt, and if you want to argue that that hits Sakamoto like it did Hakari in the arm, Sakamoto isn't growing that arm back. I mean, he's just down an arm for the rest of this fight, and if Kashimo keeps that up, no matter how powerful or how equal you want to say physically these two characters are, because he has that lethal attack that he can recharge and use anytime he needs to, it's kind of essentially either going to be a battle of attrition or game over if he aims for the head. Even a character whose domain expansion at this point isn't even violent or a one-hit kill, like Kenji Hakari, who has his Restless Gambler domain expansion and just gets jackpot, which he's going to have to fight alongside Sakamoto inside the domain expansion to even hit. If you consider this character that might be able to keep up with Sakamoto physically, can keep this up, get a jackpot, any kind of damage that Sakamoto does against Hakari is going to be immediately regenerated and healed. And we already see how devastating that can be in a close quarters fight from the short scuffle we've already seen with Hakari and Arame, in which Hakari is just such a berserker type fighter. It doesn't matter what you do to him, you take his limbs off, you take his legs off, everything. Hakari is going to keep charging at you and blitzing you and fighting you to the death, and he's not even going to give Sakamoto a chance to use the environment to his advantage. So I think yeah, at this level we're starting to see, even with how much we talked up domain expansions and how much one-hit kill domains can make a huge difference for Sakamoto, once you start getting to a level of character where they are able to keep up with him in speed, in durability, in fighting style and potential, and you add extra lethality into that, you don't even need domain expansion like Kashimo. Or you can have a domain that's just an additional asset to your physical arsenal, and you can still make a difference.
Yeah, Sakamoto's used to people that'll die if you shoot him in the head, or die if you shoot him 30 times. Unfortunately, he's not met the gambling addict Kenji Hakari, right? He's on a roll. Unfortunately, a lot of the knowledge he has about killing a person don't work here. And that's even true with cursed spirits parts that we mentioned, right? Oh, they can heal, they can regenerate from some of the most ridiculous stuff imaginable. It's like, oh yeah, that is like genuinely a pretty big problem. And I mean, going on in a special grade to I guess to beat a dead assassin is like, we got Gojo, we got Sukuna, we got Yuta, Kenjaku, like Yuki. I mean, come on. Domain expansions galore. Gojo is untouchable. Sukuna has invisible slashes. Yuta's got 40,000 curse techniques in the bag. Kenjaku is one of the best domains in the series. Yuki literally will probably one-shot Sakamoto if he's blocking with his entire body. I mean, very strong character, elite character, one of the greatest characters, I think, feat-wise in terms of like physical abilities. But as we've reiterated before, once we get to characters that don't rely on physicality exclusively, it gets scary for him. It gets real bad. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you have anything to add, but it's just like, once you get to these level of characters, it's like, even if we do be like really generous, we give them cursed tools, it's like, all right, you give him Inverted Spear of Heaven versus Gojo, that's fine. It helped Toji a little bit, but Toji didn't win that fight, you know what I mean? You give him Soul Split Katana and it's like, now you gotta get past Infinity, or you gotta get past the thousands of invisible slashes Sukuna will be sending your way, or the amplified cursed speech that instead of being in the hands of like Inumaki, it's in the hands of Yuta Akotsu. It just gets bad. It gets real bad at these upper echelons. I'm not gonna lie to you.
Yeah, I mean, even Kenjaku, who's one of this group, specifically mentions that being classified as special grade gives you the definition of being able to tackle an entire nation of warriors by yourself, just either based off your curse technique, your potential, whatever you have that makes you a special grade. And to be able to combat something like that, Sakamoto just does not have. I mean, we're at a level where even a character like Toji, whether you want to say how relative they sit to Sakamoto or not, a character like Toji, who is the purest representation of humanity and coming at it as the sorcerer killer, the assassin, the speedster, the invisible man, everything that we know and we love Sakamoto for, just gets absolutely trounced. And if this is a tier of character that Toji can't even stand up against, I mean, it's pretty clear that a very similar foe of Sakamoto is just going to have no chance against characters that can tackle entire countries by themselves.
100,000,000%. Now, speaking of Toji, me and Noop recorded a very similar idea, but flipped, where we put Toji, you know, a fellow assassin, a fellow student of the game, but we put him in the Sakamoto Days universe to see how he would fit. So, first of all, I'd like to thank you, Noop, for joining me. And second of all, I'd like to direct you guys there, because this is basically this video's other half. If you guys did enjoy this, you liked seeing us put Sakamoto Days against JJK, I'm sure you guys will love the antithesis of that with Toji versus the entire Sakamoto Days universe. Appreciate you all coming out here. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. You can check out all of these other collabs that me and Noop have done if you've already checked out the Toji versus Sakamoto Days video. And hope to see you guys in the next one.